Okay, welcome people that are joining us at the moment. We'll just wait a few minutes. We've got about 15 participants in at the moment and just a few more expected. So my name's Mark Errichiello. I'll be one of your hosts tonight from Master Advocates Real Estate Services. We're joining this meeting in association with the Moonee Valley City Council. We've got the COVID-19 Business Support Webinar Series that we're proudly part of, as well as our fantastic special guests that have joined us and special guest speakers this evening. We've got the current REIV President, Leah Calnan, and former past President, REIV past President, and current Director, Mr. Richard Simpson. So they'll be joining us. They're standing by for their presentations as well. So in a few minutes, we'll get cracking. Okay. Would have been good to have some background music right now. So I will apologise. It's my first webinar of this scale. So hopefully, if any hiccups happen, we'll try and fix them quickly.
All right, Mark. The most common issue that people have is they forget to unmute themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
Work that out.
Well, I'll start with some of the slides that you're actually seeing. What we do have here. So this is our event and our speakers. So Leah and Richard, I was actually very glad that they came on board. I had a short period of experience in the Members Council with the REIV, and I was always very impressed with both of your thoughts that you shared and opinions, as well as all the information you've been sharing on your webinars lately. So it's great to be able to get a webinar hosted on the north side right now. Some of Leah's experience here. I've got some of your profiles as well from the REIV Board of Directors. So Leah's actually a Director of Metro Property Management as well, which has property management and Metro Property Sales, and been on the Board of REIV Directors since 2014. We have Richard Simpson, so WB Simpson and Sons, a family real estate agency, and 140 years family network. I think it'd be one of the largest family businesses of that scale.
Oldest family business.
Yeah. Oldest, yeah, and oldest, and definitely from Melbourne, which is fantastic. I went to school at St. Joseph's in North Melbourne, just around the corner. So that's great.
Yeah, I know. Well.
Yeah, sorry, Richard, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I know St. Joseph's well. Yes. Just
sadly,
one of the local schools, yeah.
But and the experience as chartered accountant, I think it brings some good insight as well, what's going on at the moment, especially from the commercial side. So we'll be hearing from you again soon. As far as some meeting etiquette and rules, just asking, other than our hosts and special guests, unless you're invited, if you can keep your microphones muted and videos on standby or disconnected, and just check your audio with your speakers as well. We'll keep questions and at the end of each segment, pending time. Any questions that we don't have time for still, please leave them on there, because if we can't fit them in today, we'll get back to you with some answers. And there'll also be some good ideas for future topics and webinars. So you can leave your request if you want a copy of the notes and the slides. You can leave those requests either in the chat or message here, or you can email us directly as well. So we'll get that out to you. So I think most participants are in now. I've just got a few more in the waiting room that'll be coming in, and then we'll get cracking. So okay, should be all. Just got one more person. Just a moment, guys. I'll just check that intermittently. Okay, so Leah, I think firstly, if you can, the first set of slides that we have, we've just got a delay with them coming up.
Oh, good.
But yeah, if you can speak on the current landscape and the present market sentiment, mainly a bit of an overview, which I had some extracts from the March and April period, and you're in touch obviously with the membership and most agents now, and what you're seeing there.
Yeah, look, it's been really interesting. I know COVID-19's been going for 7 weeks now. It does feel like it's been going for a lot longer. I'm sure everyone listening and and working within all of the constraints that we all are at the moment to find it a challenging place. But overall, the Victorian property market has been very impressive. We came off the 2019 December figures, and we were doing extremely well there. And into the March quarter figures for 2020, we saw the median house price increase to $893,000, and that was an increase of 3.7%. We're seeing our days on market, in the presentation that you can see in front of you, sitting at 32 days. We're seeing, that clearance rate for April sitting at 73%. And all these changes, although, we're working within that COVID-19 space, we're seeing properties are selling, whether it be in that online auction platform at the moment or in the private treaty area, they're certainly still selling. And in fact, we know from feedback from a lot of members so far is that, the May and June months will be, we'll see a much lower level of stock available. So, that's certainly something that we'll continue to monitor. The rental vacancy rate's been consistent. So that's the second month, we're sitting at 2.3%. Yes. We're seeing those tenants are giving notice. We're seeing inquiry levels. They did drop off over probably the first couple of weeks of, once everyone was trying to find their feet with regards to COVID-19. But overall, we're still seeing, people making inquiries, people attending inspections, properties are leasing. There might be some adjustments to the asking rent, but we're not anticipating, or we're not seeing a large portion of those adjustments at this stage.
Oh, that's great. And I'm not sure what you're hearing from the membership, but this week, just even on the north side with colleagues I've been speaking to, that they've had an increase in inquiry. I'm not sure if you think, in your opinion, if that's due to some of the upcoming news that the lockdowns and restrictions on property inspections might be relaxing.
Yeah, look, I think it's just one of those, the Victorian market is just a strong market. So overall, we'll continue to see a good level of traffic coming through. I think the $1 million question we've had this week, and Richard's probably the same, and I know Gil King, our CEO, is the same, what will Daniel Andrews do? I'd love to say and announce that, we're going to see all those restrictions lifted, but I think what we'll probably see is, there might be some, adjustment to restrictions. I'm not sure that the real estate industry will benefit any of those restrictions, the loosening of those restrictions at the moment. I think they'll be watching the WA market, we'll be watching the New South Wales and the Queensland states as well to see how they move forward. But we're certainly going to be advocating for the restrictions to be adjusted, loosened across our industry, when the time rises.
Fantastic. So, yeah, look, I think I was quite impressed with the way that Victoria adapt, especially to the private inspection and the speed and all the information REIV's been putting out there. So that it's definitely had a benefit, I think, in keeping the market going. If anyone had any questions or there was any more input on this particular topic, I'm happy to move on to the next.
Mark, I was going to add something if I could.
Certainly.
A couple of things just to say that what we're not seeing is a large fall off in prices of houses and apartments. That's mainly due to the lack of stock that's coming onto the market. I think vendors are saying, look, why should I sell now if I don't have to sell?
Yes.
I'll just wait until things get a little bit better. So the level of stock on the market is significantly reduced than it would otherwise have been. The buyers are still there. There are still plenty of cashed up buyers that we're seeing, especially first home buyers who, in that sort of sub $600,000 mark, who qualify for the government's stamp duty concessions. Also, downsizers are in the market, and some families are moving around because they're seeing a chance to get a bargain. So we're not seeing property prices fall off a cliff, which is really good from that perspective. Sure, there'll be some deals that would be done at prices that would have been greater in different times, but across the market it hasn't been a significant fall off. And I think what we'll see is as we come out of restrictions, and it's probably, I was having this chat with another agent recently, it's probably pretty important that the restrictions are well lifted by springtime, the traditional selling season. And if we see that, then I think the market's going to bounce back pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that was a good point. There's some opportunistic buyers now, but there's
Can't
also...
hear you, Mark. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. You can hear me now?
Mark, yeah, can't hear you.
I can.
How's that? Is that better?
Yep, I can hear you.
What I was going to say is that, yeah, definitely, Richard, if you can hear me now, that we can, see, other than opportunistic buyers, there's a lot of off-market sales as well that will probably convert to listings as the confidence and the strength in the market continues. I'm not sure if you could hear me now, but say that my audio's on.
Yeah, I can hear you, Mark.
We may have lost Richard's audio.
Yeah, that's okay. His earphones, it's the ears. It's a very interesting space, having the ears working all the time now.
Yep. Oh, here we go. That should be okay. All right. So, Leah, what we might do is, if we move on to the next topic, even just a quick rundown on some of the amendments that have been postponed, or if that's, I guess, helping, because there's less things to manage and deal with for agents at the moment with that being postponed.
Yeah, absolutely. This was certainly a concern of the REIV, and, being a property manager myself, and knowing and understanding what the workload was already coming at property managers, it was important for the government to understand that we were concerned about the introduction of the Residential Tenancy Act still taking effect on 1 July this year. And we'd put that request through for it to be postponed for a 6-month period. So it was really pleasing to see that we were able to achieve that result. Yes. It just gives property owners and property managers, whether in that residential space, just a chance to catch their breath. They're dealing with a lot of rent reductions at the moment. They're dealing with whole new processes with regards to legislation on applications. We've completely tipped them upside down. So to be able to have this extra time, and it will also allow them to be better informed and learn through the once those regulations come out, and be better prepared for the introduction of the new Residential Tenancy Act come 1 January next year. So yeah, that was a great win. I have to say I was very pleased with that win. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think it's a good time to focus on the main issues at hand. So no, thanks for giving us a quick update on that. And there's lots of material that's been shared out there by the REIV as well, which I'm sure we can get access if people need it, especially the members.
Yeah, because there's 130 changes that were coming into effect. It's not just half a dozen or 20 or 30. It's 130. So it was an enormous bill, and there's a lot of learning still to happen there.
Yeah, a lot of learning to digest as agents, and then also to communicate out to landlords and tenants. On that basis, that's another big task. So, I'm sure there's a lot of relief out there with the COVID-19 laws, and mainly to do with the rental package first, for some relief, and the changes there with the Omnibus Act. If you could give us some highlights or insight on that as well.
Yeah, so we know the Omnibus Bill was passed on the 29th of March, and it's in place now until the 29th of September 2020. It comes with some changes that we would normally have under the Residential Tenancy Act. So things around rent increases. So rent increases are suspended for 6 months. And the challenging part about that is that if there were rent increases issued, say, in middle of February, even though they were due to come into effect middle of April, those rent increases will now are not allowed to come into effect. We've had changes with the application process. So in normal terms, if a tenant fell into arrears or the property was going to be sold or owner wanted to move in, you would serve a notice giving the tenant the required notice period. And then if they failed to comply with that notice, there would be an application made. Whereas now it's the reverse. You actually have to make an application to the tribunal to get permission to be able to issue not a notice, but a time frame in order to terminate the tenancy. So it is changing things around a little bit, and property managers are trying to get their head around that. We know that we've had some challenges in the landlord insurance space as well, because there are different policies in place, and there's been some reductions made to their rent default periods. And also we've had the rental relief package. And that's probably, there was an announcement, and, we certainly learnt that you've got to wait for the detail to really understand it. And that $2,000 was certainly broadcast that, landlords, they can make a rent reduction and get $2,000. And it's actually not quite like that. It's up to $2,000, and tenants need to be paying in excess of 30% of their rent, and will have to have negotiated some level of rent reduction. And the tenant needs to meet the criteria of earning less than $100,000 and having less than $5,000 in their savings account. So we're still working through the practical element of it. But I think one of the most important things, particularly for residential property managers, is that now they have an understanding that 30% is the figure that they work to. So it's important that they go away, they're able to obtain information from the tenant of, prior to COVID-19, what were they earning? Now, during COVID-19, what are they earning? And put this into a calculator to be able to say, okay, their contribution now to their rent is above or below that 30%. And that's been absolutely an enormous step forward for property managers, and also for landlords, because, owners would say, well, what sort of relief should I give? Should it be $10 a week? Should it be $50 a month? You tell me. So to have a formula now, that certainly makes a big difference. Yeah, absolutely. And I've probably got it easier than Richard has in the commercial space there.
Yeah, we were going to move on to Richard after this part as well. But with like the, I guess with the actual calculations as well, giving a fair assessment of hardship, that I think I heard you mention in one of your other webinars that it's actually each individual or occupant in the household, if they're eligible, they can apply for the $2,000, and then it gets transferred. Is it by the agency trust account like normal rental collection?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the things, and that's why the rental relief package took so long to come together, because there are so many scenarios of, okay, what happens if the three of us live in a rental share house together? And, two of us are fine, we don't have a reduced income, but one of us does. Are we calculating it on the combined income, or are we working on it in an individual? So we got that clarity that it is based on, for a share house arrangement where individuals aren't pooling their money together, it is on an individual assessment. Yes. And somebody who is has had their income reduced, they are able to apply. Whereas if you're in a household, in a partnership, whatever that looks like, you would look at your entire combined household income, and therefore working on whether or not, if the one person's had reduced hours, how has that affected the overall contribution to the amount of rent they're paying.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And before we move on from the residential side, if anyone had any questions, or if Richard, if you wanted to add something on the residential as well before we look at the commercial side, because we've got actually a lot of local traders. We're involved personally with the Essendon North Traders Association, a lot of local traders in Moonee Valley, and anyone else on tonight would be interested in that update and more updates that came through today.
Look, Mark, I don't have anything else that I wanted to add to Leah. Leah's expert in this area, and she knows the legislation backwards, other than it's a lot of work for property managers, and their mental health and well-being needs to be considered in the whole scheme of things. It's very stressful for both the property manager, the landlord, especially for landlords who rely on the income from their rental properties to live off, self-funded retirees and the like. Yes. As well as for the tenants who are concerned about where they're going to live and how they're going to pay the rent and how they're going to pay for their groceries and the like. So it's a difficult time for everybody.
Yeah, certainly. But, well, look, yeah, thanks for that, Leah, as well. We might get Richard to take on a bit of an update on the commercial side with the same package and the updates and the fact sheets that have come through.
Yeah, sure, Mark. I guess I'll start by saying that sort of at the end of March, the commercial property market was turned upside down when the Victorian government decided to implement social distancing and lockdown procedures, particularly in some industries, travel, fitness and gyms, cafes and restaurants and the like, really bore the brunt, or are still bearing the brunt of these social distancing and stay-at-home orders that the Victorian government has put in place. And people and small businesses suddenly had their revenues cut significantly, and that really impacted on their ability to pay rents. So the National Cabinet in early April came up with a national code which set out 14 principles in relation to negotiating with landlords, between landlords and tenants over rent reductions. And the overriding principle was that during this COVID-19 pandemic, that the landlord should give the tenant a rent reduction equivalent to their fall in their turnover. So if a tenant's has found their turnover has fallen by 50%, then they should really only be paying 50% rent. The other thing is that some tenants have actually mandatory had to close. So if you're a gymnasium, you can't open at the moment. So those tenants have had their income cut to zero. So those tenants have been, knocking on our door saying, "Look, Richard, we can't pay any rent at all at the moment because we don't have any income. All our direct debits have been cancelled or suspended, and nobody's coming into our gymnasium." And there are other industries as well. Travel agents are really struggling. Anyone who does any touchy-feely work, so physios, chiropractors, those type of people, people who do remedial massage and the like, are really have just shut their doors because they've got nobody in. I've even got a record store that's really struggling, and you'd think, well, people might still want to go and buy records, but they're stay-at-home orders. Records is a touchy thing. People like to flick through the records or the CDs and the like, and put their hands over everything. And so the tenant was sick of having to disinfect the store every time somebody came in, so he closed his doors. The overarching principle, I said, was a proportionate reduction in rent, and then there was some principles included a deferral of half of any reduction in rent to be paid back later over a 2-year period, or the length of the lease, whichever was the longest, and also a waiver of half of the rent relief. So tenants are entitled not to have to pay back the full amount of rent. The Victorian government legislated in around the end of April, 23rd of April, to make regulations in relation to commercial leases, and the regulations were published on the 1st of May, so only last Friday. Those regulations were put in place, and they set out the process by which a commercial tenant must now seek rent relief from a landlord. And it basically says that in order to qualify for a protection of the code and the protection of the regulations and legislation, that a tenant must write to its landlord, tell them that they're a small, medium enterprise, so that's a turnover of less than $50 million, and that they have enrolled in the JobKeeper scheme. So once you meet those criteria as a tenant, then and you send that information into the landlord, you also should send information concerning your proportionate fall in income, so credit card receipts, takings, ledgers, profit and loss statements, BAS statements, etc., so the landlord can assess your fall in revenue. And then the landlord has 14 days to come back with a rent relief. They call it rent relief proposal, and within that proposal, half of the rent relief be deferred, half of it is to be waived, and the deferral part to be paid back over 2 years. And then if you do that and you follow those guidelines and regulations, then you'll be afforded the protection under the legislation, and that protection includes not being evicted from the property for non-payment of the original rent amount. You can still be evicted for non-payment of any agreed rent amount, rent reduction, reduced rent amount. It also means that the landlord can't access your security deposit in any way during the period to pay rent or outgoings. And you're also protected from any rent rises in the relevant period, and the relevant period being the 29th of March all the way through to the 29th of September. So that's the process sort of in a nutshell. There are other little details in the regulations and legislation, but it does throw up some curly questions, especially if you're trying to manage the process. You know, what if the tenant decides to close when they could have stayed open, such as a cafe who could have stayed open and sold takeaway, but decided to close because his staff wouldn't come in because they were scared of catching the virus. So there are a number of sort of scenarios that sort of pop up. It also, the regulations also say that the rent relief should take into consideration the tenant's ability to continue on after the COVID-19 pandemic is over, but also the landlord's ability to give any rent relief. So some landlords will be in stronger position than other landlords. Some landlords, as I have a few, self-funded retirees, like I mentioned before, and they will be requiring that income to live off and pay their own household bills as well as buy groceries and the like. So I've seen situations where there's rents have been suspended because the tenant can't operate, and the landlord's family have had to support them, their sons and daughters having to give them money to live. So it's a difficult situation for both landlords and tenants, and really the government wants the landlords and tenants to get together and negotiate their way through this. And fingers crossed we'll get some relief in the coming weeks from social distancing. It'll make it a bit easier, and people can go to shop.
Relax things.
They can do some shopping and some non-essential shopping, and although Leah will probably say that all shopping is essential, but some non-essential shopping and help these businesses get some money in to pay their rents and continue come back to a more normal life.
Yeah, and then you mentioned the self-managed retirees that are relying on that income as well. So would they be the type of landlords that if they're in a position, even if it's resolved that the tenant is in hardship and can't continue operating commercial sense, that they could then apply for the relief of land tax or other subsidies that they're eligible for?
Yeah, there is some relief for landlords on land tax. It's 25% reduction in the proportionate holding, but when you look at the whole scheme of things, for most landlords, they're going to lose out on this. The land tax reduction is not enough to cover any losses in the rent that they're going to incur over the 6-month period. These landlords are, they ring me every day asking if the tenant paid any rent, and they feel a little bit left out, especially the self-funded retirees, because they're not on the pension, they're not on any job seeker, they can't get JobKeeper, and they don't have anywhere else to turn to.
Yeah. Well, look, sorry, Leah, you were going to say?
I was just going to say they seem to be the one portion of the investment market that was really, overlooked.
Yeah. So they'd be, I guess, all of us are hoping that it gets resolved and contained quickly, but as soon as things get back to normal, it's better for them, how they get affected on the bottom line.
Yeah, and they say to me, "Oh, Richard, I might have to sell," and that's quite sad for them, because this is properties they've built up over their lifetime, paid their taxes, they haven't been a burden on the public purse, and
assisted
selling their properties into a more depressed market now, than being able to hold them for later when it's a better time to sell. So.
Oh, thank you. It was good insight as well. And I guess if there was anything else anyone wanted to add, I haven't seen any questions come through on this topic yet, but that means that you're doing a great job as guest speakers, I feel. So that's a good thing. I guess you're happy for us to move on, Richard. You're. Oh yeah,
I don't mind. I'm happy to take any questions now, or if somebody wants to ring me later and discuss a specific circumstance that they have and to work through a problem, then I'm happy to take a telephone call. I've got taken telephone calls from members and emails from members all over the place, so I'm happy to help.
That's great. That's very good of you. And so Richard Simpson's details can be found online as well. You can contact you through the REIV. Reach out to myself. I can pass on your details as well, or through WP Simpson and Son. So and same with Leah. I'm sure that you probably get a lot of questions each day, but you guys have been great when people need specific information. I guess we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Leah, if you're happy to give a little bit more of an update on some of the main updates in the last week with the omnibus, the emergency measures.
Yeah, no problem, Mark. So we saw the legislation come into effect, and as I mentioned before, what we're seeing is restrictions with regards to rent increases, restrictions with regards to holding a tenant accountable for for lease breaks if they're in a fixed term tenancy. So at the moment, if they're suffering or if they're experiencing extreme financial hardship due to COVID-19, even if they're in a fixed term residential lease, they are allowed to be given just 14 days notice. They can exit the lease with no costs. However, you need to also see the other side. If they're not experiencing any financial or hardship relating to COVID-19 and say, for example, they've bought a property or their circumstances have changed, then they would fall into a normal lease break, and the normal lease break costs would be applicable. So that's where there's a little bit of a juggle at the moment in understanding the different processes.
Yes.
It's quite interesting, the new step. So like I mentioned before, you make an application to the tribunal to actually get permission in order to proceed with ending a tenancy. So, for example, if an owner wants to sell or has sold the property, now we have to make an application under these new sections. Yes. And we have to be able to provide supporting documentation, notice of what the time frame would look like for the tenant, written notification from the purchaser confirming they want to move in, making sure that you've got things like the contract of sale and the authority. So there's a lot of additional information that we wouldn't normally provide at that initial stage. And it's going to be really interesting to see what the time frame is in relation to how quickly VCAT hears and makes decisions. There's also a provision. So we know there's two scenarios for people who are defaulting in rent. So, and we have cases where people who are just not paying the rent for whatever reason, they're potentially not suffering in financial hardship due to COVID-19. They've just heard the Prime Minister and the Premier announce that there was a moratorium for eviction, so they didn't have to pay their rent. So there is a section in the Omnibus Bill that allows you to terminate a tenancy or make an application to terminate for non-payment of rent, which is really good for residential owners. And you can also take a mediation process, and then that's facilitated through the Consumer Affairs and then ultimately through DHHS. So there's two different avenues. So it's a continual work in progress, but it is an interesting time with legislation at the moment.
Mediation as well might get more delays with time to actually get in front of. Is a mediation with members, or is it with the representatives from Consumer Affairs, assessors?
So it's with representatives through Consumer Affairs, and there will be a chief dispute resolution officer. There'll be a few of those people who are employed, and that's part of the $500 million that was allocated that goes towards funding those people in those roles. What we are seeing is that when a property manager says to a tenant, well, you need to demonstrate that financial hardship, we are finding people are saying, well, no, I'm not showing you anything. So it's much easier just to go straight to that mediation process, and then the Consumer Affairs or the DHHS person will encourage them. Otherwise, it will end up at VCAT, and potentially a tenancy will be terminated for the willful non-payment of rent.
Almost like reapplying for the tenancy again and show the position.
Yeah, it's like processing an application again, middle of the term. And, Richard and I talk about all the extra work that's associated. You're re-looking at figures and information. You're referring to original bank statements. You're looking at the industry that the person's employed in. And I think particularly for the residential market, part of the conversations that will come through from Consumer Affairs and DHHS will be, well, what sort of rent reduction is the owner prepared to offer the tenant, but also what employment and what industry is the owner in? Because if the owner can't demonstrate that they've potentially faced some level of financial hardship during this time, it makes a hard argument to be able to say, well, the owner's only willing to give a 5 or a 10% reduction when maybe they should be giving a 10 or a 15%. So yeah, there's always different scenarios there.
Oh, thank you. We actually had a question that was asked by Ray, and Richard's kindly answered it as well, but others might want the answer to that question as well, if you're able to share that, Richard.
Yeah, I think it was Ray asked a question about whether what dates the commercial regulations relate to. So the relevant period is the 29th of March to the 29th of September. And the regulations have a sunset provision in them that means that they will elapse on the 29th of September unless extended. So the question was around the tenant's rent. In my view, the tenant should be paying March's rent in full. If they don't have the money and they can't pay March's rent, then at the end of the day, it's a negotiated position between the landlord and the tenant. Some tenants that I have were, I'll say, poor quality tenants before COVID-19, and they're using this as an excuse not to pay any rents for March. So we're holding firm in relation to that and making sure that they pay their March rent before we even discuss any rent relief for them. One thing that I didn't mention previously was that if the landlord and the tenant in a commercial rent relief negotiation can't come to any agreement, then the Office of Small Business Commissioner will hear the dispute. It'll be free of charge, and a case manager will be appointed, and that case manager will contact the landlord and tenant independently prior to the mediation, and they will speak to the landlord and tenant, tell them what information they need to provide, tell them their rights and obligations under the regulations, and then that mediation will be hopefully a binding agreement between the landlord and tenant. If not, then a certificate can be issued by the Office of Small Business Commissioner, and the landlord and tenant can take that dispute to VCAT. So we're just trying to find out at the moment whether VCAT will be free for the landlord or tenant, but we're not sure about it at the moment. But the binding mediation at the Office of Small Business Commissioner will be at no cost. They're very conscious, the government's very conscious of not having to overburden landlords and tenants with additional costs at this difficult time.
Okay, we've actually had a few more questions come through on the commercial front. Sorry, Leah, we got...
oh, that's okay. I'm happy to take a rest.
Come in, but David Gonzalez, I know he's happy for me to mention his name. He's here in the chat group. He's actually a local trader and solicitor from MNG Lawyers. But he's asked, with the commercial leases, it's important to negotiate in good faith. Not everyone is negotiating in good faith, which makes resolution difficult. If resolution cannot be achieved, then application to the Small Business Commissioner for mediation should be made promptly.
Yeah, I agree with that, David. That's right. If the negotiations are going nowhere, get a professional mediator to get involved, and it can be quickly done. Yeah. And
he also mentioned that VCAT is a non-cost jurisdiction for commercial.
So there we go. So that's good. Yeah. So excellent. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, David, the questions as well. And we have a Jan who's asked, can a shopping centre put up the annual 5% increase if it was April 29th? If they can't or cannot, when will the 5% increase start? It's a start of a third year out of a 6-year contract.
Yeah. I gather, Gian, you're a tenant in a shopping centre. So if you follow the regulations and ask for the rent relief in accordance with the regulations, apply for JobKeeper, and you meet all those requirements, then the shopping centre won't be able to put up your rent between the days of the 29th of March to the 29th of September. Now, whether we've sought clarification from the government whether the rent review is just lost or whether the rent review is moved and can be put up at a later stage. I'm very conscious of this, especially for landlords, because the rent increases compound over a long lease, and you may get to the end of a longer lease and not be where you need to be. But I think maybe it's at the end of, it's got to be something that's got to be negotiated in the agreement between the landlord and tenant about that rent increase. When will it happen? Will it be that exact amount? Will it be lost? Again, we have no clarification on it, but I suggest it's something that can be negotiated as part of the whole COVID-19 pandemic rent relief negotiation.
Thanks, Richard. I think you've got another commercial question coming through here from Lou Panisi, one about, I think it's on your list of frequently asked questions as well from REIV, but just wondering if tenants who have closed their businesses and getting 100% rent relief, but you are still managing their properties, what happens with commission? Because they're basically managing properties.
Lou, this is a big issue for real estate agents, whether they're residential or whether they're commercial, that the rents go down and therefore their fees go down. Ultimately, it comes down to the individual client that you're dealing with. You need to have that discussion with them. Some of my clients are saying, Richard, I'm feeling the pain, so you need to feel the pain. Other clients are saying to me, Richard, look, I'm happy to pay your normal management fee on the rent that I'm not getting. And other clients have said to me, Richard, this is way and above the expectations of a property manager, commercial or residential, and you should be paid extra. Unfortunately, my clients who say that are few and far between, but at the end of the day, you've got to negotiate with your client, and whatever you do, it's important, Lou, that you get it agreed in writing, so that when it comes around to audit time, if the auditors question it, that you've got that agreement in writing.
Thanks so much, Richard. And yeah, if there's any more questions, please put them through. We do. We have one from Ray, another commercial question been going on. So commercial rents have been going up for a long time, but not tenants' profits. Somehow rent reviews should be brought forward. So if you've got any thoughts on that, Richard?
I'm not quite sure what Ray means there by bringing the rent reviews forward. I think maybe he means the market. I think he means market rent reviews, so that the rents would fall.
Yes.
I think, Ray, we're going to see rents fall. There's no doubt about it in the next 6 months, and maybe even going forward. We're going to have next quarter, no doubt, a fall in the CPI for the first time in a long time. It's going to be negative. Capital values of properties are going to fall. There's no doubt that if you are coming towards the end of your lease, that actually this is quite a good time as a tenant to negotiate a new lease at a reduced rent. I think landlords would be pretty happy to have a tenant in there paying something than no tenant in there paying a lot of money because they won't get anything. So you may be able to use that to your benefit.
Thanks, guys. And some good feedback here. We've actually got the Honourable Bill Shorten, who's joined the room and said that thanks very much, very informative from Bill Shorten. So that's good feedback for yourselves and the REIV. Some benefits from tonight, and we're still not finished. So thanks for sharing that, Mr. Shorten. And John has another question, if that's okay, Richard.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah. So.
I'm loving this, Richard. It's usually everyone wants to know residential queries.
Yeah, look, Leah, I'm happy to share the limelight with you. You know that.
Thanks.
So
we've got. Can you see John's question there?
John's saying that she's a hospitality business and she's having zero business and doesn't expect zero business for the next 6 months and rely on corporate and weddings. Yeah, John. So I feel for you. That's a difficult position to be in because where you've got no business and you don't expect any business for the next 6 months, that's difficult. I think you should contact your agent or your landlord immediately and have a discussion with them. I wouldn't expect that you pay any rent while you've got no income coming in. Sometimes we're asking the tenants, what can you pay? Can you pay something? And maybe you can pay the outgoings and help the landlord that way. But it may be that that you just have it's a bit of wait and see, and hopefully your business will pick up. Once the restrictions get relaxed a little bit. I totally get it about weddings. I don't think there's going to be big weddings for a long time, and so that's very difficult for you. But I would suggest get straight onto your landlord or agent and start that negotiation now.
Okay, well, thank you. And we might move on just for pace before, due to time, but we can also, as Richard offered kindly, to contact him with questions, or if we've got time at the end of the segments, we can ask some more questions as well and get them answered. If that's okay for you guys.
Yeah,
Richard?
that's fine. I've put my telephone number in the chat already, so feel free to call me. Yeah.
Fantastic. I've put up the slide there, Leah, if you wanted to give some updates. There's been some good research reports from the March Bulletin and April Bulletin as well that I think they reflected when the change of the lockdown happened. A lot of properties were forced from auction to convert to private sale quickly, and quite a few have sold since.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it goes to showing the strength of the Victorian property market, where we're seeing a clearance rate for March at 72% on average. There were weekends in February that we had a couple of 80% clearance rate days. And in comparison to just this time last year, it's a remarkable turnaround. It's even sometimes we go, really? It's moved around and turned that quickly. So it just again shows the strength, I think. Yeah,
and being resourceful, everyone had to adapt to technology pretty quickly. So,
yeah, and the industry is often, it's very much an industry where people don't necessarily like change. And, I suppose it's just in human nature. Most of us don't like change. So to see how quickly a lot of agents move their auctions from that, the street performance to the online platforms and instantly change their business practices, introducing the social distancing and the hygiene processes and practices. It's been remarkable. They've certainly moved with the times very, very quickly.
Yeah, the hygiene processes, I think it's allowing a lot more time in the day. Like I like to think I'm pretty hygienic anyway, but it is a lot of extra time management and planning. I think people are having to cope with, and even getting access to the sanitary products is another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So overall, we know that there will be that, we've had that strong clearance rates. As Richard said earlier, we know that coming into the May, June and July, we'll have less stock available. Traditionally, the winter months always have lower transactions. So we'll see that's reflected again in 2020. What we'll probably see is there'll be a lower amount again in comparison to what we would normally see. But I'm certainly of the opinion that we'll see everything start to rebuild up and come through, and we should probably start to see some spring auction campaigns. They may even start a little bit earlier. We might see them start early August or mid-August. And we might even, we saw back in, I think, 2017, I think it was, when, just in December, we saw auctions running right up until that last Saturday just before Christmas. If the property market continues the way it started, there is that potential that we'll see, a high level of transactions and auctions continuing right through until the end of the year.
Well, that's good news. So, and then, also we touched on this point about the listings that converted to private sale, and quite a few have sold. But then the auction market across many suburbs have been having some good results still, even with online auctions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love some of these, some of the data that we're able to generate through the REIV, because it shows in this particular slide the varying suburbs. So you go from Oakley to Moonee Ponds to Laylaw to Forest Hill and West Meadows. So I really like the fact that it shows that across the well, it's not really Metro Melbourne anymore, but across Melbourne there is so much activity. It's not just inner city, 5Ks from the CBD. It's not just the suburbs in and around the Stonington area that have that high level of auction transactions. And then we also see from the other side where you've got, you've got Craigieburn. Craigieburn and Reservoir and Preston, they have been the leaders in the number of auctions. I think they would easily be at the top of the list for probably 3 years. Yeah. It's just amazing. Those particular suburbs, we see those continual transactions. Richmond's also a heavy contributor. We know Bentley's such a large suburb. But again, it just shows you there is so much activity out there.
No, look, and they've been, turning out the data and converting it pretty quickly. The April market reports have come out as well. So, there's been a lot of benefits out there. If there's any agents that aren't REIV members yet, there's still opportunity, and the discounts you can talk about later on, I guess.
Yes, there's a lot. Yeah, if you're not an REIV member, you don't know exactly what is going on. So yeah, definitely come on board and join us.
And the rental market as well. There's some data to the I guess the reports that have come from March and February probably haven't seen a decline yet from all these negotiations going on.
Yeah, look, we probably won't see too much reflection in the vacancy rates there with regards to the rent reductions, because they're only going to be rent reductions for a couple of months. Mm-hmm. And I'd encourage, in the residential market, commercial is very, very different, but in that residential market, you'd be looking at a 1 month, a 2 month, or maybe a 3 month rent reduction, and then the rent comes back up. And one of the reasons for that is we know that JobKeeper and Job Seeker payments are going to filter through, and we know the restrictions are going to loosen up. So we'll see, more people return back to work. What I think is really important to look at with regards to the rental market is particularly in regional Victoria. For those people that want that lifestyle and be able to still commute, or, affordable housing, there's so many opportunities in regional Victoria. We saw in the, Gippsland area, a vacancy rate's been consistent under 1%. Yes. And that was before the bushfires. So, we see it in Ballarat and Bendigo. We see it in certain areas of Geelong. There is that real balance out there that people want lifestyle, but they also want, convenience. They still want to be able to commute into the city if that's potentially what they do. And we'll probably see that our work life change. Will we see people return back to big offices, and will they have big meeting rooms, or resume the new way of doing our larger meetings?
Yeah, and even with my clients, some of them personally have gone to that regional or bayside change where they can, I guess, good infrastructure. We can get access to the city and employment faster, or sometimes work remotely, and they've been doing that. And probably a question for Richard as well, with if that does happen where people do prefer or are capable of working remotely, what happens with all office space? Can that be converted to residential? Do you see that outlook in
well, yeah, Mark, it's actually a very interesting question, because, you think, oh, well, people are going to work from home, so you're going to need less office space. But the discussion is really around also the fact that when you do go to the office, you actually got to be further apart than you were before. So if social distancing remains, then there may not be the reduction in need for office space. And in fact, the new way of hot desking and things like that, I think, is going to go by the wayside, because people are not going to want to share a desk with somebody else who may have not disinfected it before they left, or may bring in other things. And so I think the way people use offices is going to change. I think there will be definitely a lot more work from home, but I think that when you are in the office, you'll be further apart. So I'm not sure how that's going to work out in the entire office space sort of thing. But office space takes a long time to change.
Okay. Through planning.
Yeah. So the demand for office space goes up, and then they build the buildings. It takes a while, and then they've got too much office because they've got the buildings. Then they don't have enough. So it goes sort of up and down quite a lot, the demand for office space. But before COVID-19, office space was starting to, at least in the Melbourne CBD, starting to level out a little bit, and demand was equaling supply. So, but there are, if you look and count the cranes in Melbourne, there are still a lot of buildings that are being built. Some of them are residential and some of them are office. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
It will be. Thank you. Before we get you to give some updates on sort of, the highlights of commercial results, or a bit of an overview, Richard, I was going to ask Leah, I saw in the REIV updates today regarding the Foreign Investment Board changes, or I guess more strict with conditions of foreign investors. Is that something you can comment on tonight, or do we have to wait for that?
I don't have all of the information at the moment. Richard, do you have anything on that one? Because I haven't got any of that information through to me just yet.
Yeah, no, I haven't read all. I haven't read. It's only just come out, and I haven't read it all. To be honest, so I can't really comment on it. But there are, as you would know,
I guess.
The Foreign Investment Review Board is now reviewing every transaction where a foreign entity is taking an interest in a business in Australia. So before there was a level of cutoff, but now they're taking a look at every single business that is being sold or venture. So I think that's what it relates to mostly.
Yeah. It might be an idea for another webinar breakout session for next time. So when you get some more details. So and then Richard. Leah, I'm not sure if there was anything else to add on the data side, but it was pretty insightful. I guess that, things are tracking along better than expected at this time.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important that positivity remains in the market. We've said continually until we see the June quarter figures. We can't make any real predictions, but based on our April figures and the feedback that we're hearing on the ground from agents, they've had busy months. So we'll have to see what comes through this month, but we're just continuing to monitor things.
Oh, thank you. We're getting close to the end of our session. So before we go, Richard, is there anything you wanted to mention about the data on commercial side shared by RLB?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Commercial is a little bit different to residential, as you'd expect, and retail sales were struggling before COVID-19, and the sale of retail property and the leasing of retail property in particular was getting a lot more difficult. The COVID-19 pandemic has really exacerbated that, and I think it's really difficult if you're a landlord and you've got a shop to lease at the moment. You're really going to struggle to find a quality tenant. Because retailing is tough at the moment. But look, there are some savvy operators out there, especially in the restaurant and cafe area. They do understand that this is going to be short term. They do want to try and use this time to redevelop their cafes and the like, and use it to set things up. And hopefully, in 3, 4, 5 months' time, things will come out. So I am getting a lot of inquiries from cafes and restaurant operators who can see through the pandemic. Okay. Not so much from anything footwear or clothing and the like, and that really the internet's changed that landscape. As far as offices go, that's in a little bit in the middle. Office inquiry is okay if you are coming towards the end of the lease and you need to move. Then you still got to go and find an office somewhere. I think businesses are doing well, such as accountants and lawyers and the like, are the main ones inquiring about offices and moving. When it comes to industrial, that's probably the highlight of the commercial sector. Warehouses, whether they're small or larger, warehouses are always in demand, and I've got no problem in moving my warehouses that I've got for lease and for sale. We're seeing a little bit less in the development side of things, so residential development is sort of a little bit on hold, so any development sites being sold aren't selling as well as they were previously, but I think that will change as we get through this. From an investment market, I think we'll see yields blow out a little bit, maybe 0.5% to 1%, depending on where the location is. I think investors, even though we've got interest rates at record lows at 0.25%, official rates, I think the fear that rents are going to come down is going to be the big driver on the retail investment market. So,
and that's a reflection in residential sometimes too. When interest rates are low, then the yields sort of adjust as well.
That's right. I think you're right there. There's obviously a lot of demand for larger industrial stuff, especially for warehousing and distribution, as people need to put their toilet paper and sanitizers somewhere before they put them into supermarkets. So, that sort of area has been sort of a standout area. But I don't know how long that's going to last. If the internet shopping continues to grow, then the big companies the likes of Amazon and the like will always need warehouse and distribution. So, and I think Coles and Woolies the same, and Aldi, and we've seen Kaufman pull out of Australia recently. So that will have some impact on that as well. So,
okay. Well, thank you. if there's any questions, both Richard and Leah have been kind to share their numbers on the chat group chat, or you can ask us if you can't receive it there. We can always pass them on. If there's anything else to add, guys, I was actually just going to let you plug the REIV for benefits of the membership as well, if you like. If there's anyone, there's a lot of agents that are working as representatives out there that may not be members, and I know that the information that REIV shared with me since I became a member has been great for me to be able to share knowledge with clients as well, and with peers. So, you can mention something if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's certainly many benefits of being an REIV member. Not only the communication that comes through, but the training, the legislation updates, the connections that we have with government. It just goes on and on. So if you want to know exactly what's happening, rather than just hearing it through the grapevine or seeing it on a Facebook chat or hearing it from somebody else, become an REIV member. You can, you get access to any of the communication that is coming out. We tell you as soon as it comes out, we know what's going on. We can put it into practical terms. And I think that's one of the huge benefits of, being able to have connections with, say, Richard and I, because we can explain it to you from a practical point of view, and then you can go away and implement it within your businesses as well. So absolutely, there's some great opportunities. There's a affiliate membership that has been highly reduced at the moment up until the 30th of June. So at least you can jump on and try before you buy, perhaps.
Yeah, test drive. So it's an idea. But, thank you. And thank you both to Richard and Leah. I thought it's usually customary to give a bottle of wine, but because of the lockdown, I've just put here on the share screen a digital bottle of IOU for later on, guys. We can share one and celebrate when we get out of the lockdown. But we've also got, some good feedback. The comments have been, welcomed, all the answers to the questions. Local solicitor David Gonzalez from M&G Lawyers has put his details out there as well if anyone wants assistance. Did you have any other closing comments you'd like to share, Leah or Richard? Or?
I think really, we'll get through it. I was just going to say, we're going to get through this.
Yeah, everyone stay safe and look after yourself and look after everybody else in your family, and we will get through this, and business will return back to normal. May take a little bit of time, but we'll get through it. And, it's really been amazing the way that the local communities where I am in North Melbourne, and I'm sure where you guys are, have been very good at looking after each other. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. I want to thank yourselves and the REIV. Also, I wanted to thank the Moonee Valley City Council and the Business Relief and Support updates and the eConnect and the e-webinars. So they've also been very resourceful in recently converting all of their outdoor grants for public events as well. They're reallocating funds. They've opened grants as of the 29th of April. I've got here on the screen that if you weren't aware already, there's funds for business to get back on track and support them for anything they had to do to adapt to working online, as well as funds from up to $5,000 to share and collaborate with other peers and other businesses in Moonee Valley. So great thing to get onto and ideas to reinvent. And I do have to put a disclaimer out there that anyone that's registered tonight, the details will be shared with Business at Moonee Valley and the Economic Development Group. And then our services as well. If anyone wants free consultation, Mark from Master Advocates, or any questions relating to their needs, you can contact me as well. And a little disclaimer that anything we've shared tonight, we can't be held liable for. Just kidding. No, we've got information there, but I did have to put the disclaimer out there that we've got a lot of great resources. I do trust the REIV, but the disclaimer's there as well. But I always like to end on a quote, and I've got quotes from my past mentors when I was with the Rain and Horn group. Randolph Clements, my father, my brother George, my father Tony, who I worked with in Rain and Horn. One of the quotes that Randolph always used to share was, "Tough times don't last, tough people do," and I always reflect on that. And then one that I like is, if something's not been achieved before, it doesn't become an obstacle; it becomes motivation. So let's get through this together.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, guys. We've actually come with pretty good time. I think it's 6:04, so I'm pretty proud of us as a group and all the questions you've answered. But yeah, that's all from me. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. No worries. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.